We're in Brussels in Face Office today. The next episode of We the Hunters, where we talk about hunting, explain what hunting is about, trying to break the myth. David Scallan, Secretary General of Face, is beside me. So we had like 2 very tough days in Brussels here. Tell us what happened.
We've just finished our General Assembly. We gathered 70 delegates from about 30 countries. And
it was well attended.
Yeah. And you know, FACE is the Federation of National Hunting Associations in Europe from 37 countries. So very good attendance. And we had a whole series of meetings and events. But the main thing at our General Assembly is we approve a work plan for next year, which we did. We approve a budget. And then we took a range of other decisions around position papers. We provided updates on our big policy files. We had a really good event in the European Parliament where this study was made public, which is...
So people just understand, this is the summary. This, like 2 volumes of this super important, crazy study that has been conducted for some years, I suppose so. So before we get into all these very important details, tell a bit about yourself. Where do you come from? Why do you hunt? And how you ended up in Brussels?
Okay. The short version, I've been here for 10 years working for FACE. Before that, I was doing some work in a voluntary capacity with the Irish Hunting Association. They had me doing some work here in Brussels, so I became familiar with the landscape here, and I always found the work of FACE super interesting. We were working at a national level in Ireland in the interest of game shooting and conservation, and to do this at a scale Europe-wide was fascinating. But a little bit more about myself. So, yes, Irish from the west of Ireland, grew up hunting mainly small game, which was, I think, a key part of my upbringing. Also fishing. We still have some good salmon rivers and some good lakes for brown trout. And it was my interest in hunting that led me also to pursue an academic career. So I did my PhD on hunting in Ireland, which was the first assessment of the role of hunting from an economic perspective, from an ecological perspective, and also from a kind of a social perspective. And that then led me to do some work in the National University of Ireland in Galway, and then led me here. So I've spent most of my life working on hunting, either academically and now professionally.
And now you're stuck in Brussels.
Now I'm stuck in Brussels. I don't put it like that. It's a good place, and to work with 37 national hunting associations is the beauty of the job. You know, I kind of call it it's a labor of love. I'm lucky. I don't consider this work.
Yeah, it is like that. It's a hobby and work at the same time. And they say if you work with your hobby, then you don't work at all. But then you don't have a hobby. It's complicated.
Yeah, I'm finding both good. I'm working with my hobby and it's working well. And when I get time, I love to go hunting. Getting time is a challenge because I have a young family and a busy program here.
And a very cute dog who's in the office now working very hard under the desk. So we have lots of people still asking about what's FACE. Because hunters see FACE as this, what it actually is, a lobby organization in Brussels, working with European Parliament, European Commission. But grassroots hunters often don't understand the actual role and the impact FACE can have. So they often say, you have to come here and help us with these issues, with wolves and jackals and bears and whatnot. Explain how it actually works, how it's directly connected, how FACE's work is directly connected to how we hunt on daily basis.
Yeah, okay. So I think your first point about awareness of FACE, we're doing some work to change that, and that will maybe appear later in the discussion, but we're 45 years in Brussels, working at this Brussels level, really focused on Brussels decision makers, the institutions, Brussels media, Brussels partners, and our members. And we've never really invested into the wider hunting community. And that's, I think, relates to the lack of awareness. Now, our members are the key players. As I said, they're the national hunting associations in 37 countries. And I think for a few decades, we were seen as kind of an insurance policy. You know, just make sure nothing goes wrong in Brussels, or if you're pushing something, push it in a good way, so we have a good future for hunting and conservation in Europe. And in the last decade or so, we've really upped our game. We've increased in our size and our staff, and we realize that we need to be much more proactive. And we have a strategy now that really focuses also on acceptance of hunting with our members, on growing the organization. And we're doing much more work now communicating externally to wider audiences. In general, it's our members that communicate to the hunters around Europe. And we have 7 million. So we're one of the biggest civil society organizations in Brussels, one of the oldest. And the key point is that the majority of decisions affecting hunters these days are originating in Brussels. So 80% of the rules and regulations are coming from Brussels, and our job is to shape them and make them good. So,
just give some examples.
Okay, the average hunter now, if you think about what you put into your shotgun or rifle, lead, ammunition, that's been regulated. The different categories of firearms you can own, that's regulated by the EU Firearms Directive. The birds you can hunt are regulated by the Birds Directive. We have a new process now on sustainable bird hunting. The wider environment, so the status of our wildlife, because our big challenge is small game populations are going down. That's because of the European farm policy. We're trying to fix that with some other initiatives. Our large carnivore management system is all regulated through the Habitats Directive. We have a regulation on invasive alien species. We've just uplisted Sika deer, which is a challenge in parts of Europe, North American mink. So these are just some examples of where Brussels is regulating at the moment. And I haven't mentioned things like animal welfare, which is a big growth area from a regulatory perspective. So we just have a regulation now on dog welfare. We had key parts, tail docking is important to keep that, for example. But I could go on, but that's a flavor of how Brussels is regulating the average European hunter. And that's why our members are really investing in us more and more for us to do our job well here.
So how does it go down? Brussels takes a decision. It goes either like in a directive or regulations. With the directive, more or less, there's a possibility of interpretation in the national laws. It's quite strict, but still you can have some adaptability possibilities. And then directive goes into the national laws and regulations, but the European regulation has to be adapted like as it is. There are no possibilities for interpretation whatsoever. So it means, like, for example, the previous lead ban on pellets, the decision was made, it was banned, and many countries even didn't have to adapt their national laws and regulations because it's already said in Brussels paper, and it affects hunters directly. That is how it works. Correct me if I'm wrong.
No, it's correct. So we have legal files and non-legal files. Often the most dangerous files are the non-legal files. So we have subgroups of technical groups and task forces belonging to those groups of experts from member states and the European Commission giving recommendations on bird hunting. And this is non-legal, they're recommendations, but governments take these seriously and our input is key. So you mentioned we have directives like the Birds Directive and the Firearms Directive, and there you have some leeway for member states to implement those, and then you have regulations which have direct legal effect. But even with regulations, you mentioned the reach restriction on lead shot over wetlands. That's an example of a regulation. We still argue this isn't a good piece of EU law, and it's been interpreted differently. And in the context of a regulation, this shouldn't be happening. So it depends on
the wording is so difficult to understand. Yes. For example, these 100 meters, the zone around the piece of water, and the question is what kind of piece of water we are talking. Is it a puddle in the middle of the field? Is it a ditch? Is it a lake? Or is it even a water collecting pool for in case of fire? We're talking actual situations in shooting ranges where they have to have a piece of water in a shooting range in case of fire, and it is a cemented pool.
Yeah.
Is that a piece of water according to the regulation, or it's not?
Yeah, we argued throughout this that the work, there was an opinion agency, the Commission made a legal proposal, it was discussed with member states, it was discussed in the Parliament. We said all along, make sure if you regulate Europe's hunting community, it's clear and it's understandable. And this is what the EU should be doing. There's a whole program here called Better Regulation. And we said throughout, you're going to have a poor piece of legislation because people won't know what a wetland is. They won't be able to understand the boundary around a wetland, which is 100 meters. There's a lack of clarity on carrying and possession of lead shot. It was challenged in one of the European courts. The court said, is it an important habitat for waterfowl? Because this is implementing an international agreement. So it depends, this piece of water in the shooting ranges that is for storage and for fire, you have to determine if that's an important piece of water for water birds. An open question.
There has never, ever been a duck close to that particular piece of water.
Well, then it could be argued this isn't a wetland in the context of this regulation.
Yeah, but then you have to prove it.
Exactly, and this is why EU law is so important, especially regulation. So someone could end up in court for discharging lead shot beside this piece of water, and who will determine that? It will be an open battle, and it'll be up to the judge at the end of the day. So this is why it's so important. If you're making a law here, it needs to be really, it needs to be a clear and understandable law. Now we have, the European Commission has a legal proposal on all lead in all ammunition. So this is a big file. And our point here is make sure you don't repeat what you did during the wetlands restriction. We told you it's going to be a bad law. It is a bad law. We've asked our members, how has this been implemented? It's not been implemented well, in our view, because it's not clear. And the same challenge is happening now. We see very short transition period proposed for lead shot, 3 years. We've already had Denmark, the Flemish part of Belgium, and the Netherlands phase out lead shot, but not in 3 years. And even these members will tell us clearly, if you phase out lead shot, you need to do this in a correct way, giving enough time. And it's not about the speed of the transition, it's about a quality transition. We also have a proposal for all centerfire rifle ammunition to be banned in 18 months. We have concerns about this because we have concerns about certain calibers. Maybe fine for the very big calibers, but in general, 18 months is too short. We have rimfire ammunition to be banned completely in 10 years, but it's very clear there isn't technical and feasible non-lead alternatives at the equivalent of lead in rimfire. So is this even legally possible to ban something without an adequate alternative? There needs to be a review clause or a permanent derogation. So I'm sounding all technical here, but the move to regulate lead in all ammunition, currently there's huge room for improvement here. That's been discussed with the member states now. It's stuck in a committee, and it's stuck because of a geopolitical concern. So that's where it is. But this is an example of a file that will affect every hunter in Europe. And Europe is incredibly diverse. This is one of the beauties of hunting in Europe. We are a very diverse continent. And if you look in Bulgaria, for example, they will tell us, 70, 80% of the shotguns are not going to be 100% fit for steel shot, so you
Oh,
need to
yeah,
adapt, modify,
That's the
etc.
same situation in the Baltic states because we have a huge amount still in use of Soviet weapons that have not and could not ever be tested. We can talk about this subject. We can actually do a whole episode on this subject, but can you explain what is in real life the consequence, what you said, of a poor piece of legislation? How it directly affects a grassroots hunter?
A poor piece of legislation. Use lead shot over wetlands as an example. You have a hunter that doesn't understand what a wetland is, doesn't understand where the boundary is. That hunter could be carrying lead shot and met by an authorized officer, the wildlife officer or the police, and they could be in trouble or accused of being in breach of the regulation. And the lack of clarity around, what is a wetland, what is not a wetland, am I carrying lead shot, etc. This is the importance of it. So this is what we fight for. In this case, the principle of phasing out lead shot over wetlands wasn't the question. 22 or 3 member states have done that, in the last 20 years. It's really about what is a good, clear law. And we gave, many, many suggestions throughout the whole process. Unfortunately, the Commission was very strong in pushing this type of definition of a wetland. And we argued it was wrong, and we believe today it's a bad piece of legislation and it's not been implemented correctly. And we just hope they don't do the same for the full restriction on lead and ammunition.
I think that many hunters around Europe have this very depressing feeling at the moment that everything is being banned, and that effect hunting organizations are having is comparatively very small. Basically, you just go and talk and prepare documents, and still bad legislation, poor pieces of regulations are accepted. But there is one really good story where FACE was really effective in a way we could never actually predict, and that's wolf. It's downlisting of wolf. So the thing is that in many countries, it's always been a situation, for example, that government says you can't hunt this or this and this because it's Europe. Europe is telling you not to shoot. They are protecting these species, especially wolf. That was case, for example, in Lithuania, where wolf was in Annex 5, which means the species is manageable, but the government was saying, no, we can't shoot it or hunt it because it's Europe. So with the downlisting, basically we took this argument away. Can you explain how it affects now different countries and what the country have to do to be able to start hunting wolves in the situations where it is necessary?
Yeah, so our position on large carnivores is one that, active management plays a really important role. And we see this in the countries that have had wolf populations and they are being managed. We also see it with brown bear as well and lynx. Conflict is often much lower, and people feel that they're managing the wildlife like they manage, other species. The hunters are very passionate about ungulate management, small game management, and this fits in that same category. But the legal protection was really preventing any proper wildlife management, because you could only remove a problem wolf, and this was increasingly interpreted by the court, if you've the satisfactory solution, etc. And member states had lots of problems because NGOs, often small NGOs, were challenging proposals to manage wolves in the courts, and the courts were interpreting EU law in a very narrow way. And we have so many problems around Europe with the wolf. I mean, Finland, they really want to be able to manage their wolf. This is what the people want. This is what the government wants, but the court system doesn't allow it because of how it's listed. So this was really important to change the status of the wolf. And
But
we fought
it's not being done just for the sake of hunting, because the wolf populations have been doing really well in the last 2 decades. I think that's the point. It's not just about downlisting and not just about being able to manage the wolves. It's about the population that is doing really well. It's a success story.
Absolutely. And the time this piece of EU law was being developed, the situation was very different. So you have a massive recovery of the wolf. This is undeniable, even by, very, very strict protection environmental NGOs. The wolf recovery is a fact, and it is a success story. But this piece of legislation has a part of it that says the annexes should change in line with scientific and technical progress. And this is what we argue, this should be implemented. And the wolf was bringing many challenges to, especially for livestock, the sheep and goat sector, combined with very difficult legal frameworks to manage. So this was a big push, but we have this proposal. It's passed, supported by the majority of member states, by the parliament, and now it's up to each European country to adapt their legislation accordingly. And if they have a wolf population that is, especially if it's in favourable status, and many of them are, they can now have a more pragmatic management approach, and they don't have to report all of these derogations that they were doing, even for individual wolves in the past, that were clogging up the court system. It was really heavy bureaucratically, legally, administratively. It was really, this needed to change.
But there are countries that are pushing back, actually. I think Poland is not going to allow it anytime soon. Or what do you hear?
Yeah, Poland is an example of a country that's changed quite a lot. So Poland argued for its wolf to be in Annex 5 so that they could manage it, but the current government of the day keeps the wolf strictly protected in Poland. So this is another, and then you have France. Even with the strict protection, they were actively managing the wolf. Sweden as well. But what we saw was a number of legal systems just kind of breaking with strict protection. Slovakia is another example. The wolf is such a political animal. They were managing the wolf, and the wolf was doing well. They had a change of minister. A Green minister decided to stop the wolf hunt. A huge amount of conflict. Next government in has the wolf management back, and it just tends to, reduce the conflict. And we know, hunting as a management tool has worked very well in a number of countries, like your own in Latvia, and this is important. And we have the same discussion with brown bear now. I mean, we have such high densities of brown bear in certain parts of Europe. How can you not manage them? It's fine. In Sweden has a good management approach for brown bear. So has Croatia. Finland, like the wolf in Annex 4, their legal system has really, broke their ability to manage brown bear. It's becoming increasingly more difficult. So the discussion will come as well about brown bear. In one way, that is even a more suitable species for a downlisting. Because brown bear populations, okay, you have high densities. They're in certain parts of Europe. Many of them are in favourable status. Annex 4 strict protection has been working to an extent, but now we see Annex 4 strict protection not working. I mean, Finland is a good example. Romania is another example where the interpretation of EU law, they stopped the brown bear hunt. They had so many problems with brown bear management. They have fatalities, they have injuries. The government decided to reopen it. So it's a species that needs to be managed where it's in high densities. And Slovenia is another example. Annex 5 would be helpful, and we see it in Sweden. The hunters are very happy with the brown bear. The brown bear management is very important to them. Conflict is low. They have a lot of brown bears. Croatia as well. Conflict is really low. The hunting community is really passionate about their brown bear population. On one hand, it's like a prized game, but yet they solve so many conflicts, the hunting community, and there's just more local rural acceptance for brown bear when they're part of a good management process. And when they're not, you have really challenging political discussions and things like that. So this, of course, is is going to be an increasing topic in the future. We see this around Europe, the discussion about brown bear.
But why do you think this is so politicized? Why is this issue so emotional?
Yeah,
Because like with these examples you're naming, as a result, many people have suffered and people have actually died. But in this situation, it looks like you need these deaths for the politicians to actually start taking good, logical decisions. Like we have so many examples, situations that work. Estonia, they have over 1,000 brown bears in a very small country. They have been in a limited way hunted, managed. They haven't had the conflicts with attacks on people, like hikers, walkers, or whatever. Latvian brown bear population is increasing. We have officially now 170, 160. We already have had an attack on a person, on a forest worker. So why is it so hard to see these logical things from hunter's perspective? Yeah. Why is this so iconic species that creates so many emotions? For example, on Facebook page, whenever we post something about wolves, people are getting very emotional. Yeah. What's about it? How do you explain it?
I think it's the same all around. It's a difficult one to explain. I mean, they are charismatic species. There's been a huge amount of investment, funding into the recovery of these species.
Okay.
There's a huge amount of and fundraising. I mean, ongoing by various organizations.
So it means like we spent a lot of money on bringing them back, and now when they are back, they don't understand why we want to start managing them, or there's this lack of understanding.
I think in some parts of Europe it's like that. I wish people cared more about the European mink, which is one of our most threatened mammals, but the money and the interest is in the more charismatic species. This is well known. And, I think it's nervous for regulators, whether it's in Brussels or whether it's at national level or regional level, because of the, highly emotive and sometimes ideological responses from different sectors of society. And really, it's about, governments really need to take leadership and ownership of these issues. And who are the really key stakeholders? They are the ones that are living with large carnivores in the countryside. But you know how the centers of powers are. Often it's the more urban vote that is often dictating what should happen in the countryside because of, certain political support. And this is a challenge. But policies that are really affecting rural people need to be really taken in line with the needs of rural people. And of course, the EU laws, the Habitats Directive is really about listing, certain species and certain habitat types that need protection because they were rare at a certain point. And now this is why the wolf was downlisted, a huge recovery. And it's come to a point where, okay, strict protection is no longer needed. And I make the point that protection is still there for the wolf. The same legal conservation obligation exists. Member states still have to ensure favorable status of their wolves, So I think it's coming to a point also politically. We see this in the last European elections, and we see this, in many parts of Europe that in some cases you can argue it's a bit more pragmatism, but the wolf was really a political animal. I mean, you had certain groups saying they will solve this very easily politically, and they had other groups that said, okay, we have to do this the right way, and the right way is a change in EU law, and then actually a change in wider European law, and now it's just up to member states to change accordingly. So some member states, like Poland, may still keep the wolf strictly protected, and that's the decision of Poland, and are they making the right decision? Our Polish member, the Polish Hunting Association, can give its view there.
they also see it as a place of a battleground in a way, because also the other side's arguments and sometimes communication can be made especially emotional. Like for example, they still keep this idea that hunters are killers of all wildlife. And when this discussion started, that there were so many articles that President of European Commission, her pony was killed by a wolf. So they interpreted this, that this decision is like her revenge on all the wolves, which is actually not the case. This is the killing of a pony is just the result of a very successful conservation story. And I have a feeling that we have a directive, we had the objective, we had the means to reach this objective, and then there was no information. What do we do after that? And now we're in this situation, and the directive does not cover the situation where wolves or other animals have recovered. So what do we do now? Yeah. It's so weird. Like, we have achieved the goal, and what's next? We don't have it.
Yeah. I mean, the aim of the directive was to be able to move the annexes, and it's just due to, the EU treaty and just a more complex legal framework to do that, it wasn't done. But you're right, it wasn't about a pony. There was 10 years of pressure by member states and by the European Parliament calling for a flexible approach and just implement the directive correctly. So this is Article 17 says the annexes shall be amended in line with scientific and technical progress. We would just fully implement the directive. And there was all sorts of legal views about how that should be done and whether it can be done. But in the end, the Commission did it. And it just took the wolf and it put the wolf in Annex 5 everywhere across Europe. So just a Europe-wide downlisting. You could argue there were maybe other approaches. Maybe certain countries could have taken, a lower level of protection. Certain countries may have taken, a stricter, actually within the directive, but the Commission said just total downlisting. Did it also under the European Convention, the Berne Convention as well, and that was the thing. But your other point is there's two types of organizations. We work a lot with the evidence-based environmental NGOs and the rural interest groups like Copa Cogeca, the European Farmers, or the European Landowners Organization. And then you have other organizations that would take a more ideological approach to hunting. We see this even with BirdLife partners in the south of Europe. They view hunting as it shouldn't be happening, bird hunting, and they may support a type of bird hunting that's incredibly narrow, or it's good if it's just for damage control. But then in the wider picture, we've done a lot of work on acceptance of hunting, and we've been working with our members to measure what does society actually think about hunting. And we're surprised when we actually measure it and you ask people, do you accept hunting? The vast majority do. So this is really encouraging. So often we're stuck with a small percentage are actively hunting. You have a small percentage actively against. The majority of society, if it's legal and well regulated and sustainable, have absolutely no problem with that. And then the other societal trends are kicking in, I think, in a very good way. Like in Germany now, they have an increasing number of hunters, increasing number of female hunters, and they're getting younger as well. And this is because there's a realization, if I want the best meat, I can get this through hunting. I can also get exercise. I can also get out in the forest. And I can also get all of these other values that I associate with. So I think often we're, sometimes too focused on the pro or anti, and we get caught in debates around the wolf that actually wider society here is pretty fine with a massive recovery. The legal framework is just changing in a small way, and management is good once it's it's good practice. And I think that's often what politicians. It's the job of a politician or a civil servant. You should be thinking that way rather than getting boxed up. But politics these days is tricky, and some small organizations are very effective at communication. And we see these campaigns being driven that are not really reflecting I would say, wider society. So this is something, I think this is something encouraging our work on society and our work on acceptance. I think this is a good thing, because you mentioned earlier about, sometimes it's very depressing. Yes, we have a regulatory machine in Brussels. 80% of the rules and regulations affecting hunting are coming from here. But when we look elsewhere, there's some really nice developments around Europe, and some of our members are really enjoying the growth in hunting, and they're creating a better framework for that. So
I think that the most important part is the possibility to bring this, what you're telling us, idea to the policymakers. Otherwise, there's a very loud group of people who is projecting their own point of views, and they are into conservation, and they are into protecting animals. They are against killing or using animals in any way. And policymakers often hear that. And there's a good example. For example, we go to the parliament or whatever, talk to politicians. And if you ask a question, is killing an animal good or bad? So what would be your first reaction? Is killing an animal good or bad?
Killing is messy. It's bad automatically.
Yes, exactly. But then when we move forward and ask the question, what did you have for breakfast?
Yeah.
And if you have a sausage, bacon, egg, or something like that, then is it good or is it bad? It cannot be measured in that way, and it's a very tough job to explain why hunting is necessary, because we can be on social media talking about dogs and animals and nature, but in the end, we still kill animals. And how do you sell this idea? For politicians, it's very hard to accept this the tiniest piece of action we do in hunting. This is the smallest, actually one of the most unimportant parts of the process, because we have everything else there.
Yeah.
And then we come to this very important study that was done by University of Urbino, if I'm not mistaken, on, I will try to read it, the firearms and ammunition sector for sporting, hunting, and civilian use in Europe. That's a very big study across whole Europe. And it proves, and it becomes like a tool for FACE to go to the policymakers and say, well, hunting and shooting is not a small marginal piece of like a type of hobby, that it's actually a huge industry. And these two big volumes I have to bring home now in my backpack. So we have this idea and feeling that hunting is just this group of small weird people who like killing animals, and it's a tough job to try to sell it to policymakers that it's much bigger. It affects safety of society, it affects safety on the roads, it affects what you put on your table, it affects spreading of different diseases that can actually be dangerous to your pets and to yourself.
Yeah, it's the value is, it's undeniable. I mean, economically, this wider societal value, the benefit it gives to those who hunt, the meat being outside, etc., the conservation role of hunting. And in our pillar of work on society and acceptance of hunting, there's an increasing view that we need to get into that precise point. It's about the why, and it's about the killing. Killing is really messy and really difficult to talk about, and because hunting involves killing an animal, we need to get in there. And there's some really nice work has been done, not that much, but by sociologists or philosophers or anthropologists, and I think we need to go there a little bit more. And so we've done a lot of work now on measuring acceptance of hunting, and the question is why. Okay, we've done some work now, and we know why in Sweden people like hunting, because one, they know a hunter, or two, they've eaten game meat, and then I accept hunting. But
But
this
that's-
point about killing is really, we really need to get into this, why. And there's a methodology to do that. You really need to get
really?
in with society. You need to get focus groups. You need some good social scientists there. You really need to get into that in the right frame and methodology and help us to be able to talk about the killing part, because it's uncomfortable. When I get to Ireland, I shoot one fallow deer a year, and I get the meat, and it fills the freezer, and I'm very happy. And you've others. My brother would shoot many more deer because he's playing a wider wildlife management role and reducing damage for the farming community, etc. And what I would talk about is that was a really nice morning. I got an animal I wanted, really focused from a meat perspective, and etc. I won't tell my friends or my family about the killing part of it, because that was
I said the tiniest part.
tiniest part, but that's the part I think we really need to engage more ourselves, and it's just uncomfortable to talk about that. But this is, I think this is for the future. I love that you're asking this question, because we need to go there and be comfortable talking about this. This is all this, yeah.
It's become in a way of taboo. It's really for even the younger generation. To talk about these things, you are a weirdo, basically. It's like,
Yeah.
But on the other hand, it goes hand in hand with the way of thinking of people who are against eating meat and against producing meat and things like that. Because what you just told me, it means that by hunting one fallow deer and filling your freezer, you're basically reducing your carbon footprint, because you're not buying so much meat in the shop.
Yeah. I mean, there's many benefits to that. We have a very...
The link is philosophical. Hunters are not against basically eating meat coming from shop, but there are hunters. No, I know people who have been vegetarian and who have become hunters because of what you just told me, that they can go out and get their meat themselves, and this is one of the most humane ways how to eat meat.
Yeah.
There are so many benefits.
Yeah, and we see this trend in Germany, for example. People that really want good meat, you can get the best in the wild. So, and that's a really good trend. But this is something, and if you ask every hunter about that moment when you pulled the trigger or didn't pull the trigger, what was going through your brain, in many cases you just don't want to mess it up. You're super focused on doing it right. There's a nervousness there, and as soon as the trigger is pulled, you really want to make sure everything, but that could be different if you ask another hunter, that's more involved in a different objective on trying to really help reduce a local population in a certain place, etc. So I think this is really interesting. This fits, I think, with where we need to go as part of our work on looking at society and hunting, because we have some, and we can be optimistic, we have some really nice trends in society. And if you look at what young people want these days, so everyone talks about Gen Z, etc. Young people want, they want a livable planet. They want one that's got healthy nature. They want exercise. They want good food. They want a bit of engagement with nature. Many of them, it's like the concrete generation. They have not seen the countryside at all. In their education program, they really get no information about maybe farming a little bit. They don't know where the meat comes from, etc. But if we can get on the right side of this, I mean, we, the entire European hunting community, our members, and some of them are really on it, I think we should capitalize on these trends, because hunting can provide these types of values that people want, the type of food people want, the benefits, etc. So I think that's why I look in a more optimistic way at the future. From a regulatory perspective, we have a machine here constantly regulating, that's 80% of the rules. And it's our job to fix that. But we have to make sure that we're taking the right decisions for the environment and for hunting. But we also have to make sure that we are really focused on, where we go in the future. We had a really good session about strategy on Tuesday afternoon. We had all of the directors of the National Hunting Associations here. And this, what we're talking about now, is really part of the strategy of most national hunting associations in Europe. This is a really good thing.
Yeah, it's a tough job to change the mind of people, because even social media will let us have videos, for example, with animals and with food. But this moment in between, it's being banned all the time. And that is something that has to be changed, because if it's legal, if it's done ethically and correctly, and if it ends with a nice meal on the table you can share with your friends, with your family, what's bad about it?
Exactly. And look, I'll give you an example. There's a really challenging aspect of hunting that's increasingly in the media, and that's the movement of hunting trophies. And we've seen certain governments take decisions on this in the past 10 years. Now we have a resolution in the European Parliament. I've just seen the text a few minutes ago. And for the first time in 10 years, that's not calling for any blanket ban on the movement of hunting trophies. And that's because we've done a job in talking to members of Parliament that there is so much peer-reviewed science that shows even when people go and travel to hunt, especially if you look at the southern African countries, they're oozing with wildlife populations, those that embrace sustainable use and hunting. And of course, there's a lot of other economic activities going on with wildlife, nature tourism, etc. But if we do our job and explain to politicians and decision makers, this is what we've done now with our partners. And there, I think, for the first time in a decade, the European Parliament is going to adopt a resolution on wildlife trade and not say we should be stopping anything to do with trophy movement, etc. And normally that's a really difficult part of hunting. I hate the term trophy hunting.
Because for normal hunter, it doesn't say anything. It's some kind of artificial, what's the term that's being used to sell other ideas.
Exactly. And often there's no space to get in and talk about the facts. And we are, 3 or 4 decades we're an evidence-based organization. That's a core value. So we take really science-based decisions. And the challenge is that facts can often just go out the window and people are just talking about emotions and ideology, and that's good and that's bad. It's like the killing point. These are uncomfortable points, And I think we need to be able to also deal with that. And that comes down to our communications. And the hunting community is really seeing now the important role of communication, and for us to be in this space talking about why we hunt and the value of that. We have 7 million hunters in Europe. If each hunter was out there in their workplace talking about hunting, sharing pictures of hunting that really capture this wider effect, like the food, not necessarily the dead animal or the blood, I think we have 7 million ambassadors for hunting in Europe. And we could really improve acceptance, and then we improve the political landscape, and then we go back to taking decisions about facts. And there we have a really strong future for hunting and conservation in Europe. But really, our ability to communicate and the need for us to be proactive. So this is really happening now within Europe's national hunting associations. They're getting active on social media. They're seeing the importance of this, especially with younger generations. And I think our future will sit in how we talk about hunting and how we portray ourselves to society. And there's 7 million of us in Europe. We should all be doing that in a good way.
Okay, just to conclude, just give some numbers and tell why is this so important at the moment.
2 of these, 1,100 pages, and we wanted an executive summary, and it's even 90 pages. So this is a really important study, the first time ever the economic value, but not just of hunting, but also the associated sector, including sport shooting, has been assessed. And it's incredible. It's 180 billion euros annually. That's the economic impact. And hunting and sport shooting is something like 90 billion. So this is huge. We had a study, it's 10 years old, that was saying we're directly spending about 16 billion a year. But the advantage of this study is also it looked at how the money is flowing through the economy from there. So it's super important to have this. And now it's our job to talk about, to politicians, economically, we matter, and it's like 0.99% of European GDP. It's a huge economic contribution, and this is getting increasingly important in other parts of Europe now.
We have another one. This is from UK, also the value of shooting that was presented in the Parliament.
Yeah, and many of our members have done national studies on the value of hunting, and this is a European-wide one. So 27 countries plus 3, Norway, Switzerland, and United Kingdom. So this was really good news, and we were happy to work with our colleagues in the industry to really get this out in front of members of the European Parliament on Tuesday evening. And it's our job now to talk about this because, we have 3 pillars. We have our economic value, and that also is more dynamic. That's also the game meat we eat. There's a big value there. We're not buying other meat. There's the role we play in terms of damage reduction, helping the farming community. There's our environmental value. We're doing a huge amount of work in the European countryside. Over 70% of the countryside is influenced by hunting management, either managing big game or hunters putting habitats in place for small game. And then it's our social, cultural value. Often in the middle of winter, there's very little going on in rural parts of Europe, but hunting is a really nice gel, a really nice social glue that keeps communities together. And that's that latter aspect, that we need to look at this in a much more future-orientated way and start telling an increasingly urbanized society, what our value is and not being afraid to engage. We need to be super proud that I'm very proud that I hunt and I fish and all the benefits associated with that. I think we can all be thinking that way. It's good news.
So these were just we touched upon in this hour on a very important issues that's going on. There's a number of other issues that are being discussed at the moment and that they are trying to regulate. So we can do another one rather sooner or later. But what people can do to support FACE? How can they give their own benefit to the whole hunting community?
Join your National Hunting Association. In some countries, if you are a hunter, you are linked, like in Poland and France and Serbia. And in some countries, it's voluntary, like our big member in the UK, the British Association for Shooting and Conservation. These are our members. That's why we have a large office here in Brussels. But they're the ones that are going to take care of hunters' interests for the future. So the one thing you can do is, what is the National Hunting Association in your country? And join it.
Exactly. And then tell quickly about the patron program we are having at FACE and how is that important? Okay,
so we run the office. It's a bit over 1 million a year, and that's from our members. They're funding our core work. But we have a lot of other work. And we're very pleased that the wider hunting sector sees our value because, and not just in Europe, but also in America, Brussels is this kind of, call it what you want. Some will call it a center of excellence. Some will call it a major problem, but it's just regulating and it's setting the global agenda. And many companies see the value in us, and we have a program there that companies can work with called the FACE Patron Program. And we have Europe's biggest companies in our gold patron, and they're supporting us financially. And then we have a number of foundations. So we, of course, are more than willing to do good projects, including on social acceptance of hunting through our foundations. And this is something else we always like to flag, the European Hunting Foundation, etc. So there's many ways companies can support us. There's many ways individuals can support us. But the average hunter, if you join your National Hunting Association, that's already a good thing because you support them and you support us, and we're all working for a good future.
Definitely, and then you can like and share and subscribe to our social media, leave a comment about important issues that concern you on a daily basis concerning hunting and maybe some other important issues we haven't seen or heard about yet. So that's the way you can help us directly, and then see you in Brussels or see you in the forest, and keep up the good job, as you always say, David.
And let's do some more topics. This is cool to be able to talk about this, and love to hear any questions or comments in the chat, whatever app you're watching this on.